to me, in spite of the sort of internal struggle that I've had, and a lot of times it is that internal conversation like you were talking about before, the messaging inside me was, you suck. You've never done that. You're an idiot. Why are you going to do that? That's dumb. And then the external me is just like, well, who cares? Just go for it. Just try it. Because even if I get embarrassed, even if they laugh at me, even if I fall on my ass, at least I tried it. So you just gotta push through those things and not be afraid of them, and somehow things will work out. I really do believe that. But it does take courage. It takes courage, even if the message is internal. And more often than not, it's not somebody else saying that you suck. It's yourself saying that you suck and that you're going to fall on your face.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of I Know This Guy, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of some of the most interesting people I know. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to I Know This Guy wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, my kids want me to say something about ringing a bell. What the hell's a bell?
Dad, who do we have lined up for the podcast?
All right. So the podcast was a referral from Dori Kahimi, and it's Scott Mayo. So he's a jazz musician, composer extraordinaire with a bio about this long.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It's like everyone from Beyonce to Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, Mick Jagger.
And little old
going.
Me.
Yeah, and then
Do you think I can make it under that bio?
Maybe at the very end.
It's small type.
Small print. The very bottom of the website.
Now, this is going to be a good interview.
Yeah, can't wait. All right, let's dive into this one.
All right, Scott. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
I have been waiting to talk to you. And I already told you earlier that we're going to dig into your backstory, but I want to know really what makes Scott Scott.
Well, I don't know if you figure that out. Let me know.
I'm going to leave that up to you.
I'm just a musician. I'm a person. I'm pretty passionate about life, and I just really try to do the best I can in any situation that I'm in. I just believe in working hard and trying to be present and accountable and all those kinds of things. And I'm not the best, but I'm not the worst either. I'm pretty good at what I do, and I'm trying to get better at pretty much everything because it's important.
Awesome. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper than that. So where did you grow up? What was school like?
I was born in a city on the Pennsylvania, New York coast, the border rather, called Elmira, New York. And the funny thing about Elmira, New York is that Mark Twain lived there. And then I moved to Rochester when I was 12 and spent the rest of my childhood in Rochester, New York, and had an incredible high school experience. My teacher, his name was Roger Eckers, was one of those really passionate music teachers who I'm still close to this day. And he equipped me completely to be a professional musician. If I did not want to go to college, I would have walked out of high school with all the skills I needed to be a professional musician. He was amazing. He really was amazing. Then I ended up going to University of Michigan for saxophone performance. And it was a completely classical education. I studied with Donald Sinta, who's probably the greatest classical saxophonist in history. And he changed my life and completely opened up the world of saxophone from a place that I'd never seen it. And it changed everything. And then I moved to LA and sort of started doing the LA thing and trying to make a living as a musician.
It's interesting. If somebody takes an interest in somebody, it doesn't have to be music, it could be anything. But I know that happened to Hayden as well. There was a musician in high school, a teacher that came in, and we talked about it on one of our podcasts recently where, kind of just inspired him. So I don't know if you want to pipe in, Hayden, but.
Was your family musical growing up? And because I think for me, it was a combination of having that role model or teacher come into view, but also it just kind of hit me at the right moment as I was just starting to delve deeper into wanting to learn music and especially jazz specifically.
No, for me, I was not from a family of musicians at all. If anything, I was from a family of athletes. So I was the weird one because I wanted to play music. And it was very interesting because there was an announcement. I was in fourth grade, and there was an announcement that, if you're in fourth grade and up, you can start an instrument and come down to the band room. And I don't know why. There was just something about that announcement. It was like, I have to go to the band room. And so I went to the band room at the end of the day and said I wanted to play an instrument. And so I came home and I told my mother I wanted to play an instrument. She said, what do you want to play? I said, drums. She said, it's too loud. Pick something else. I said, trumpet. She said, it's still too loud. Pick something else. And I said, guitar. She said, stop picking loud instruments. You're going to play clarinet. We have a clarinet in the house. Both of your brothers quit. So that's what you're going to start on. And so I started as a clarinetist because everything else was too loud. And then I just was one of those kids. I just really loved to practice. I loved the smell of the cork grease. It was really strange. I would come home and I'd grab my clarinet and I'd play along with the cartoons. And I really, really loved to play. I was the kid that you had to make stop playing. Please put the clarinet down. Please. You're killing us. So I was just that. I loved it.
Yeah, so right from start, you hear some of these professional musicians that just, once they grab that instrument, they never put it down. And I remember, I'm an old guy, guys, but I remember Johnny Carson interviewing Willie Nelson way back. And he was just saying he couldn't remember a time he wasn't with his guitar. He was always playing the guitar the second that he picked it up. So, and you were similar.
Yeah, I really was. And then, I have really, really patient parents, really supportive, patient parents. So a couple of years after I played clarinet, I wanted to play saxophone. So my dad went out and he bought me a saxophone. And then a couple of years after that, I was like, hey, I want to play flute. So he went out and he bought me a flute. And so now you got 3 instruments being practiced at the house all the time, obsessively. And years later, I went home and I was like, I said, why don't you guys keep buying me all those instruments? And my dad said, well, because you were getting to the point where you were at an age where a lot of parents were worried about where their kids were at nighttime. And you were downstairs practicing. So I figured I would get a little less sleep. At least I knew where my son was. So I thought that was beautiful.
Did you pick up jazz right off the bat?
No. So no, not at all. I did not pick up jazz, but there was a point in which I was in a band. I was 13 and I was in this band. And my dad said, it looks like you're serious about this music thing. I said, yeah. He said, well, then you need to hear some real music. And so he sat me down and he played me Miles Davis. I was like, what is this? He said, this is jazz. I said, I hate this music. He said, listen to it. And then he started taking me to jam sessions. Every Sunday night, there was a jam session in town at this place called Jenks and Jones in Rochester. And he would take me every Sunday. And I didn't know how to improvise. I didn't know anything. He'd always make me bring my horn. And these older musicians were always super encouraging and super nice. And they would tell me what to listen to. And just being in the environment of live jazz sort of started it for me. And that was sort of my journey. I learned jazz in nightclubs, the old-fashioned way, by talking to older jazz musicians, many of whom were legends, and I didn't know who they were at the time because I was a kid. And I just learned by listening to them and transcribing solos when I went home and learning as much as I could. That was it. I didn't go to school for jazz. I went to school. I learned jazz in clubs.
Is there any genre of jazz that you like the best?
Not really. I'm kind of, I think when you become a student of jazz, you sort of expose yourself to all of it. And so I played complete avant-garde gigs where it sounds like I've lost my mind and I'm in it. I love it. And then I played completely inside swinging gigs where we're doing a lot of Count Basie, and I love that. I just love the music, all of it.
I was just thinking, as soon as you said swing, I think of a band out of Hawaii, a Hawaiian swing band. I think it's called Kahualani. Anyways, I hope I didn't bastardize their name. But as soon as I heard them, it was like old time, like they just got into the audience, right? And this guy, he was Hawaiian, and his father used to play to the GIs. And the one thing that always stood out is his big set of chompers. He was always smiling. And I got to know the band over, because every Wednesday night they used to play in this one area. And he said, yeah, my dad told me whenever I'm performing, I got to smile. He says, and he never stops smiling while he's performing. But just an incredible show band. He was Grammy nominated too, by the way, the band. Yeah, it was pretty cool. So let's talk about. All right, so you're in high school in Rochester. Oh, and by the way,
Yeah.
I went through film, so in college, and one of the best experiences I've ever done in my life was going to Rochester and sitting down at the Kodak Museum and seeing 500,000 films sitting there. And I could sit there. If I lived in Rochester, I would just sit in front and watch. Like, you could pull any film you wanted out of there. So you went to University of Michigan, and you were saying that the top sax instructor that of his time, right? Okay. How did that lead to the next step in your life?
Well, it's weird because for me, college wasn't necessarily a straight path to sort of success or making a living in the music business. At the time, University of Michigan, it was a conservatory exclusively. If you played jazz, it was because you liked it, but there was no school program for jazz. So it was all classical. Consequently, if you were going to do something outside of the classical realm, there was not a clear path as to what one does to make a living. And so I just moved out to LA. I moved in with my cousin and another guy that I went to school with. He moved out at the same time and ironically moved across the street from me. And we just started doing our thing. I joined the musicians union and I would go down to I would go to every jam session that I possibly could. I always had my horn in the trunk just to get my name out there, just to let people know who I am. And that sort of started me being able to start doing gigs in town. Just people knew that I was this new guy. And then there was a time where I played with this artist. His name was Leslie Drayton, trumpet player. At the time he was Marvin Gaye's musical director. And he said, you know what? You need to come over to my house. So I went over to his house and he literally picked up the phone and started making phone calls to tell people who I was. I'm this new guy in town. I play all these instruments and they should hire me. And literally that one man started my career because he just took a chance and started making calls because he believed in me. And I've always been grateful to him for that because he didn't have to do that. And that kind of kindness really, really went a long way to sort of establish me in this city. And I appreciate him forever.
Where are those people?
Yeah, they're out there. I mean, I do think that there are people that are out there that are like that. I just think that they're so busy sort of operating in the shadows that people don't talk about them, and they don't want the credit. They just want to help somebody. And so I think that they're still out there. I really do think that they're still out there. I really do.
So if a young musician comes up to you, you see some talent, are you going to pay it forward?
Absolutely. I always do that. I do that a lot with a lot of young musicians. You'd be surprised how many people come over here to the studio and just want to talk. There's one guy who he reached out to me on Facebook and said that his teacher talked to my teacher and said that he should get in touch with me. He said, I'm coming to LA. Can I come by? So he came by to the studio and we just talked. He wanted to know, what it was like in LA making a living and if it was a good time. And I said, yeah, come on out. And he moved out here and I didn't know he was here. I went to my son is a singer. And he came to his gig one night and I saw him. I was like, hey, what are you doing? He said, I moved here 6 months ago. And he's making a living as a full-time musician in Los Angeles. And he said, I can't thank you enough for your encouragement because the only reason I'm here is because of that talk with you. So I try to do that as much as I can because I think it's really, really important. It really is.
Yeah, I was talking about this yesterday, but about the importance of networking and just, giving. And one of the big differences between probably quite a few people that go to events is that they try to take instead of give. And they don't realize if they give more, it comes back tenfold. And I hear that all the time, but it's true. Just helping people out, just because you want to help people out, comes back 10 times.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, like this artistic life is unique in that I can't really take any ownership over anything. Like anything that I do musically is not because I'm so cool and I just came up with all my own stuff. I ripped off Freddie Hubbard and Herbie Hancock and all of these people and Beethoven and Brahms. And I get everything that I can possibly get from all these people. And I try to integrate it with what I do. So therefore I have no ownership over it. So my job is to share it with other people as much as I possibly can, because that's the whole point of trying to push this music art thing forward. You have to push it forward by giving it to the next generation and letting them do their thing. And they're going to do it their way, just like I did.
Right. Well, let's get back to your break. Okay, so you get out to LA. Somebody calls a few friends to give you a break. Where do you go from there?
I just sort of started gigging. And I think if I were to say what was the sort of moment that changed everything was Anita Baker. She moved out to LA to do a record. And my ex-wife knew her from Detroit. They all grew up together. And so when it came time to do this record, a mutual friend was producing the record. And so he got my ex-wife, Valerie, who's an amazing singer, to do all the background vocals. So we ended up singing on the record together. And Anita said, hey, I'm going to do a tour. Do you want to do my first tour? And I was like, yeah, sure. I didn't know what a tour was. I'd never been on tour. I didn't know anybody that had been on a tour before. So I ended up doing her first tour. It was her big record, her first debut record called Rapture. And I toured with her for a year and a half of my life. And that was great. And I sort of thought like, maybe I'm in, maybe I'm finally in. I wasn't quite in. So I came back to LA and I worked at Budget Rent-A-Car. And then I worked at Thrifty Rent-A-Car. And then there was an audition for Jody Watley. And I went to the audition. And it was a few years later. And then from that point in time, I pretty much have been a full-time musician with a few exceptions, but I've pretty much been doing it full-time since then. And that was like 1991. And that was a big turning point, I think, in my career overall.
That was a stepping stone, huh?
Yeah. And then I toured for a long, long time. I toured with a lot of different artists and then came back in town and I did stuff real stealthily. People didn't know really what I was doing or who I was. And I was doing a lot of recording sessions in town. I'd be like the solo saxophone player on a bunch of different records of a bunch of different styles. And I would just go back home and no one knew because I didn't do horn section stuff. So horn players in LA didn't even know who I was. They didn't even know me, but all the producers knew me and so that worked out in my favor.
So let's talk about some of the musicians you've played with.
I'm so bad at that. I played with so many great musicians. I played with Marcus Miller and John Patitucci and, a lot of recording artists like Bruce Springsteen and, of course, Mick Jagger and Earth, Wind and Fire, which was huge in my life. Just
by the way, I saw that.
Really?
Yeah. It was incredible. Yeah, there again, thank you to YouTube. But yeah, I watched that. It was, I think it was about an hour long, wasn't it?
Probably.
Anyway, there's a YouTube video out there that if anybody listening wants to, check out Scott, check it out. It's great.
It's fun. It was a great time in my life. It really was. I love having been a part of that band. It was a literal dream come true.
Wow. What would have been like being with Earth, Wind and Fire?
Well, for me, you sort of have to imagine that as a kid, I was a fan of the band, like a huge fan, to the point where I had posters, because inside of each album, they would have a poster. And so I had posters stuck to my ceiling. So they were literally the first thing I saw in the morning and the last thing I saw at night. And so I always used to tell everybody in high school, I'm going to play with Earth, Wind and Fire someday. I'm going to play with Earth, Wind and Fire. And all my friends were like, yeah, okay, Scott, great, whatever. And then the opportunity came, ironically, because I did a Philip Bailey record. And he was there. He was at the studio. And he was impressed with what I did. So he said, hey, we might be needing another saxophone player. Are you down? I was like, for what? He said, the band. I was like, Earth, Wind and Fire? He was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, I'm in, of course. And I started doing it. And it was really, really wonderful. And it was literally a dream come true. I'd been in the band for maybe 2 years. And at one point we were in Osaka. And we're doing After the Love Is Gone. And I remember, I'll never forget this. I'm in the band 2 years. And we're playing After the Love Is Gone. And I'm playing and I'm looking at Maurice White. And as I'm looking at him, he's looking at me and I looked out at the audience and I was like, oh my God. And I turned around and I looked at the rest of the band and I turned back around and I looked at Maurice and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in Earth, Wind and Fire. And at that moment I started to tear up because it all hit me like, oh my God, I talked about this in high school. And it was an amazing moment. And I never took it for granted because I really always felt that it was a really special thing to be a part of such a rich musical lineage and that I am now a part of that. And that's huge. That's huge to have those kind of moments in your life. It really is.
You know, when I look at successful franchises or corporations or entrepreneurs, I see this type of culture. And it's not just from the top down, although you'll hear that all the time, but it's people buying in to the culture. And when I hear about Earth, Wind, and Fire, the one thing I love about it is that they've got this wall of energy, and it's just incredible. Again, I love the band. Did you find that kind of ooze throughout the band, like that type of culture that you could just kind of buy into?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the amount of excellence at every position in the band was pretty heavy. I've never been quite so driven by a group of musicians to be a badass. I mean, every single person. I remember one time we were walking out on the stage and we were going to do Boogie. I had this idea for Boogie Wonderland. And so I said, hey guys, when we go out to do Boogie Wonderland, let's put that last hit on the end of 4. They're like, all right, cool. No one really even looked at me as I said it. And Boogie Wonderland was 45 minutes into the show. We never talked about it again. And we got to that last hit and it was perfectly on the end of 4, as opposed to where we had always put it. And that level of focus really spoke to the musicianship and in that band. And that was every night, everywhere we went. We never had a bad show, ever, because the musicians were so, so good. And I'm just super proud to have been in that band, especially that particular group of musicians at that time. It was great.
Go ahead, Hade.
I feel like with a lot of larger touring bands, like normally those types of decisions aren't made on the spot. With that specific circumstance, like did you have the freedom to make those choices on stage, or like was that all?
Yeah, I mean, okay. No, there were definitely things that were locked into place for sure. I mean, because we had choreography, we had lighting, so it wasn't a jazz gig, but there were moments. There were definitely moments in the show where you were allowed to open up and do your thing and just flow and go with the moment. And that was just one of those things where it wasn't going to be significant. It wasn't going to affect the lighting. It wasn't going to affect the choreography or anything like that. So I knew it. And I was like, hey, let's just try this tonight. And it was a really cool thing. But we had those moments in the show where we could just jam, and we would for a long time. And the audience loved it. It was great.
All right. So you're with Earth, Wind, and Fire. Let's talk about some interesting moments. So do you have any fond moments or funny moments that you like to talk about?
With that band?
Yeah, or just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I've had fun. We've had a lot of fun. We when you're on the road, you meet a lot of very strange people, and people wear strange things. They say strange things. They do strange things. We've had people come backstage after the show, and when we walk into the green room, we've seen people faint. There's been a lot of crazy things. There was a woman that came backstage after the show and literally took off her panties in front of everybody, and I was like, whoa, okay. So there was a lot of crazy things that happened on the road. It was fun. We had a good time. Yep.
Oh, that's great. All right. So, whenever I see or I talk to musicians, New York, LA, why?
Honestly, the reason I chose to move to LA versus New York City was because of the weather. Honestly, I'd had enough.
It was the weather.
It was literally the weather. It was 1977. I woke up and I thought my dad put something on the windows. I was like, that's interesting. And so I went to the bathroom and there was something on the window. I was like, oh, that's weird. And I went into the living room and I was like, oh my God. And I said, Pop, wake up. And he woke up. He's like, oh, you got to be kidding me. I didn't know that snow had covered the whole front of the house. We had this huge blizzard that came into Buffalo and Rochester. And we had to go out to the back of the house and dig around to the front of the house and just to get through the driveway. And it was like the parting of the Red Sea when we were finally done, because the snow looked like it was like 10 feet high. And so my brother was like, "Hey, Pop, where's my car?" He said, "Where'd you park it?" He said, "Where I normally do." So my dad climbs up on top of the snowdrift and he takes his shovel and he's like, "Cluck, cluck, cluck. Here's your car right here."
Oh,
I was done. That year, said, "I'm done." I said, "I'm not spending my life in this weather." I refused. And so that was literally it. That made the decision to move to LA.
I don't know if this was the same storm, but I know Buffalo got hit, and I woke up and I heard we had a bad storm here, but because of lake effect, they had 7 feet of snow. And this was around 76, 77. So it might have been the same storm. But then the next day, they got 7 feet of snow. So I don't know if that was the same thing, but oh my gosh, it was crazy.
Yeah, I can't. That was it. That was it for me. And then I'll tell you, the one thing that was weird was when I was a kid and I would watch the Rose Parade, it made no sense to me. I'm like, I don't understand. How is it 75 degrees there when it's 18 degrees here? I do not know. How is this the same landmass? That makes no sense to me. Now that I live here and I live in Pasadena and I go to the Rose Parade, I'm like, oh, it's 75. I'm so glad it's here. I just, and so I love living in LA. I really do, for all the obvious reasons.
You can take that knife out of my back right now because I'm just looking out at the window. The snow's there. The lake's frozen. Oh. You probably talked about this a ton, and there's a lot to say what's happening right now. Hayden's a musician. COVID's killed it for gigging for a lot of musicians. You want to talk a little bit about that and what you see for the future?
Yeah, for me, it's funny because I did some writing about this because I tried to figure out like what am I feeling in COVID? Because I didn't really feel like creating. I don't know if I was depressed, but I couldn't figure it out. But then I realized in a strange way, what was bringing me comfort was that it wasn't personal. I didn't lose the gig because they didn't like me. We all lost the gig. Everybody lost the gig. The challenging part of COVID was that it wasn't just one or two gigs and then I could make some calls to get another gig. There were no gigs. Everything came to a crashing halt. And so it was really like, well, what do we do with our time? And then not just because of COVID, but because of the shutdown, I can't even physically connect with the musicians that I'm used to being connected to. So your sense of community was sort of gone. And it was really very bizarre as to what do you do with your time, And so for me, thankfully, I have the studio. So that was a blessing in that I could continue to work. I had a place that I could work, I could write. And then people that were like me that had facilities to record, you could record. And so there were still portions of the business that still needed to be done. And so musicians like me were thankfully able to record and get some work. But if you were a gigging musician, for example, you were just dead in the water and there was nothing to do. So I've just really tried to encourage musicians to practice as much as they can, grow in areas that maybe they felt like they needed some growth. If it was like a personal growth thing, read some books. If you wanted to learn a new instrument or a language, do that now. But don't just sit around and be depressed about what's not there. Because what is going to come, it's going to come back. I really believe that very strongly. It's going to come back. But I do think it's important to keep moving forward in some aspects of your life because at least you can own it that way. But it's been really challenging. I mean, I had a whole year's worth of gigs and sessions canceled in 72 hours.
72 hours.
Wow. 72 hours. It was just email after email, call after call. I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. And it was pretty shocking. And this was going to be a particularly good year for me because I worked with Sergio Mendes and his record was done. I have 4 songs that I wrote on that. They just did a documentary on that. We were about to start a big, big tour and all of it was canceled. So all of that was canceled, but it is what it is. And so you just have to sort of try to be strong and keep pushing in the midst of it.
Scott, what about mental health?
I think that sort of goes back to what I was saying about, about our sense of community. Because really, whether you're a gigging musician or a recording musician, no matter what you are, you're still connected to those people. And when you don't have those connections anymore, you do start to feel very, very isolated and very, very lonely. And so I try to stay connected with musicians as much as I can, just, thankfully over Zoom or FaceTime or whatever it is, just to see people's faces so I don't feel so alone. And sometimes it's important to talk to people about, hey, I'm in a block right now. I don't want to practice. I don't want to write anything. I can't listen to music without being really mad. Am I weird? Is there something wrong with me? And, invariably friends are like, nope, I'm going through the same thing. And somehow there's comfort in that we can build each other up because you realize you're not alone, that you're not weird. There's nothing wrong with you, that this COVID thing is real and it's big and it's affecting all of us in different ways. And so talk to people about it. That's what I really try to encourage people to do. Talk about it.
Even yourself, talk to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'll give you there you go. But a mental health check, like, how are you doing? And if you're not doing well, get some help, because so many of my friends, I've had some lost their lives to suicide, but just day to day, there's a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and you can help that by just reaching out and talking to the right people. So, and especially in, your world, because like you just said, your whole life for gigging for that 1 year was wiped out in 72 hours.
And I think it's also hard. It's a little harder for us because, we're emotional beings than artists are. We operate in that realm all the time. So, we tend to be much more sensitive in those areas. And so we get affected. The hit of those things is a little harder on us than it is for non-artist people.
So one of the things in music, it's so important for an artist to find their own voice and just to let it out. Do you think you've achieved this?
I do. Yeah, I do. It's a thing. You have to really take the time to be sensitive with who you are and like how you would sing the song versus how Aretha Franklin would sing it or Willie Nelson. Like, they're great. They are amazing artists. But what would happen if you were to combine those two styles? What would you sound like? What would that sound like? And then so you try that. I just think that like developing your own voice really comes from listening to a lot of different music. Just keep listening, and the advantage of recording is that you can hear yourself back. You hear it back, it's like, I sound a little too much like Willie Nelson. Let me try it again. And so I think that developing your own voice is really important. And I feel like I've done it. I pretty much know who I am, and I know who I am on every instrument. So I can hear, if I hear myself in a recording playing flute, I'm like, yeah, that's me. I can hear it. There's a way that I play the flute. There's a way I play clarinet. And
what about forging your own path in life? Have you been able to do that?
Yeah, I have. I think the problem sometimes with us is that we get a gig and we let our whole world revolve around that gig. And then when that gig ends, then we're lost. And so I think it's important to be diversified artistically, not just stylistically diversified, but maybe instrumentally diversified. If you can sing, learn how to play the bass. If you can play the bass, learn how to play the drums. So I think that all of those things make you more valuable in the marketplace. And then do your own thing. Try this, try that, try this. If you have a long-term gig, keep that gig, but still do other things so that you're not beholden to that gig. So when that gig ends, you still have other stuff you can do. And that way you can sort of forge your own path and do your own thing, whatever that means. And it's going to look different for every single person. But I do think that it's important to try to do your thing, whatever that is. If that's arranging, then go arrange. You arrange music and arrange the hell out of it and kill it and do that. No matter what people think. Oh, she's a great bass player. Well, that's great. Yes, she's a great bass player too, but she's also a great arranger. So I think that it's important to just try your own thing and keep doing it no matter what anybody says. And I think I've been able to do that, thankfully.
You've done a lot of touring. You've had lots of accomplishments. When you achieve these things, so let's say you come off of a big tour or something big in your life happens, do you find that hard to accept because it's over, to move on to the next thing? Do you ever get depressed because of that? Or do you have a different emotion maybe when a tour ends?
I used to feel really unsure when I was younger. Like, okay, so now what do I do? Here's the challenge. When you do long tours in particular, like a year and a half tour or something like that, these people become your family. You know, you can buy books for them, you can buy shoes, you can pick out clothes, you can pick out a mate. You know, you really, really start to get to know these people. And then when the tour is over and you come home, you're like, you feel very disconnected from those people because now they've gone on, they're doing their life and they're back with their friends and their family, and you're not connected with them anymore. And it feels very strange and very lonely. But then as I got older and I started to do more things, I started to plan. So now you know the tour is ending. And so you start to make calls. So that like, I'll be back in town in March. You know, let me know if you need me to do anything. And so you start to line stuff up so that when the tour ends, it's not quite so jagged to you. It's just the ending of a tour. And then you move on to the stuff that you have here in town. But yeah, I mean, it used to be depressing, but it's not anymore. Now you just treat everything like it is what it is. It's a job, and you do your job, and then you move on to the next job.
That concludes part 1 of our interview with Scott Mayo. Make sure to tune in later this week to hear the rest of the episode. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to follow us on Facebook and YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast. It really helps us grow the show and keeps you in the know. That's enough of me, and I'll see you later this week.